For most viewers, Craig Melvin is the picture of steadiness, a warm voice, a grounded presence, a man who manages to balance seriousness and optimism with effortless charm. He seems eternally composed, even under pressure. But what many didn't know was that Craig had been fighting a private struggle, one that crept into his life in subtle ways long before he acknowledged it. It began quietly, so quietly that Craig didn't recognize it as a warning. There were mornings when he woke up feeling oddly depleted, even after a full night's sleep, days when his usual energy felt muted, replaced by a heaviness he couldn't quite explain. At first, he chalked it up to the usual demands of his job: early mornings, long segments, interviews that required both emotional and mental stamina. But the fatigue lingered. During one taping, his cameras reset between segments, Craig gripped the edge of the desk a little longer than usual. A colleague asked if he was all right. Craig flashed his trademark smile and said, "Just a long night." No one questioned him. After all, he was the one who pushed through, who delivered flawlessly no matter what was happening behind the scenes. But the truth was more complicated. At home, Lindsay Tarniak, his wife and closest confidant, sensed something was wrong. She noticed how he moved a bit slower some evenings, how he rubbed the back of his neck with that subtle gesture she'd learned to recognize as fatigue. She noticed how he avoided talking about how he was really feeling. One night, after putting their children to bed, Lindsay sat down beside him on the couch. "Craig," she said gently, "I think you're carrying something you're not talking about." Craig sighed. "I'm fine, Linz, just tired. Work's been demanding." But she knew better, and deep down, Craig did too. It wasn't until a morning broadcast when Craig felt a sudden wave of lightheadedness, nothing dramatic, but enough to pause him mid-sentence, that he realized he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He finished the segment smoothly, the professional he has always been, but afterward, he sat alone in the empty studio for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of what he'd been avoiding. Later that day, Lindsay convinced him to see a doctor. She didn't push him, she simply held his hand and said, "You matter to us, and we need you to take this seriously." At the appointment, Craig described the fatigue, the occasional dizziness, the sense of being off that he had tried so hard to ignore. The doctor listened carefully, nodding in that way professionals do when the pieces begin to form a picture. "You've been under strain, Craig," the doctor said gently. "Your body is asking you to slow down. These small alarms, these quiet signals, they're not something to brush aside." Craig felt the words sink deep. He had spent years telling other people's stories about wellness, longevity, and taking care of oneself. But confronting his own vulnerability felt different, more humbling, more real. Over the weeks that followed, Craig made small but important changes. He adjusted his schedule, carving out pockets of rest. He began paying closer attention to the everyday signals he used to dismiss. And perhaps most significantly, he let people in, something he'd always struggled with. Lindsay became his greatest source of strength. They talked openly about the changes he needed to make, not out of fear, but out of love. The quiet moments they shared, morning coffee on the porch, short walks after dinner, became grounding rituals for Craig, reminding him of what mattered most. His colleagues noticed the shift too. The man who once powered through without pause began to work more intentionally, more gently with himself. And in doing so, he became even more present, more connected to the work he loved. Craig didn't experience a dramatic health crisis. There was no headline moment. Instead, his was a journey marked by whispers instead of shouts. But those whispers carried wisdom. They taught him that ignoring the body's signals doesn't make them disappear. They taught him that strength isn't measured by how much a person can endure, but by the courage it takes to acknowledge limits. For many viewers in their 60s and beyond, Craig's story resonates deeply. It reflects a truth many learn with age, that life rarely gives us loud warnings. More often, it sends small indicators, gentle nudges urging us to slow down, to reevaluate, to take stock of what we're asking of ourselves. Craig's hidden battle wasn't just about health, it was about awakening. It was about learning to honor the quiet alarms he had once ignored, and in doing so, he discovered a new kind of resilience, one rooted in humility, self-awareness, and gratitude for the people who stood by him through every step.